Yael, one of my favorite parakim in all of Tanakh is Shemot Perek Bet.
Agreed.
It's one of the most literarily organized, just the symmetry and the chiasm. There's a real high that goes on there when I open up the Shemot Perek Bet. And one of the reasons I think also why it's so unique is because we rarely know anything about our biggest leaders before we meet them. And we meet Abraham. We know that there was a journey, but before Lech Lecha, we know nothing. We don't know why God chooses him. And of course, that's why the Midrashim come and fill in that gap. And with Moshe, so we almost know nothing about him, but we actually have a pretty big window in terms of Tanakh dimensions into why he's chosen. And in Shemot Perek Bet, we have the first 10 psukim really deal with his birth and the way that he's saved and is able to persist in this world. And the second section has sort of 3 vignettes that follow each other, each of which give us a very fascinating and moving window into who Moshe was and sort of where he had to journey from to then become who he was as leader of Am Yisrael, and also perhaps what were some of his strengths that we really see in his early life that bring God to choose him, so that when we open up to the 3rd chapter in Shemot, we understand why God has chosen him to be the leader of Am Yisrael. So the first thing that really strikes me when I open up this parak, even before Moshe gets saved, is the fact that he's from the tribe of Levi. Because the last time we left Levi, their future wasn't looking very good, right? Yaakov curses Levi and Shimon, and we sort of expect that they're going to disappear and not be a very significant part of Am Yisrael. And then we open up the book of Shemot, and there we have our anonymous heroes as Avayel bet Levi vayikach et bat Levi. We have these 2 people who, under the duress of the decree of Paro, decide to. They do have a child. This child is saved. And obviously we have the role of the women surrounding in saving Moshe. But immediately we sort of see that there's something here that's utterly surprised. Not only that a boy has survived, in even though Paro has decreed that they all need to die, but that they're actually from the tribe of Levi. So that itself is something that always that grabs me very much.
Did you write your doctorate about that?
I did, but I wasn't going to say it on the video. I did, and it's a very significant piece also because we don't have any Levi'im who are really identified after this in this series in this section of the Torah, and I think that there are many elements here that connect to that idea. But even if we get to where Vayigdal Hayeled, right, that he grows up and he's taken in by Bat Paro, that she herself is a real renegade, right? She goes against what her father decrees and utterly defies, which is one of the many great examples of a woman living in the same house as a man, where she doesn't actually listen to what he says. But we'll leave that point on the side for now. I guess we can come back to it when we get to Megillat Esther next year. But we have these 3 vignettes where he goes out. He seems to already know who his actual birth family is. He knows that he's from the Israelites. And he sees here the Ish Mitzri Makeh Ish Ivri Me'achav. And he really, he can't stand by and see this injustice happening. And he goes and he kills the Mitzri. Now, what I think is fascinating here that really connects us to the Seder and the whole broader conversation of Yetziat Mitzrayim, because a lot of the elements in this story really foreshadow what's going to come later, is that we have the word Makeh, right, that he hits the Mitzri, which is sort of our first foreshadowing of the fact that Moshe is also going to enable this whole process of makot that are going to come later. And so that's sort of like the first piece that comes up in the story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think also between the first incident and the second incident, we have 2 very different types of actions that are going to really define Moshe's leadership. His first incident is he's using his hand, right? He's makeh. In the second incident, he uses his peh, he speaks. And what we see, at least in this initial experience, is that he's very successful when he uses his hand, and he's quite a bit less successful when he uses his mouth. And this becomes something that is a real challenge for Moshe, so that if the first part of his life, he brings about the Eser Makot, he is meant to transition to bring about the Aseret HaDevarim. Yeah. And that's not a simple transition for Moshe. He says, Kvad peh ukvad lashon anochi, lo ish devarim anochi, right? And of course, that also marks his ultimate failure. The reason that he is condemned not to enter the land is because he prefers, in that kind of moment of stress, he prefers always to revert back to the hand. But what God is demanding of him is to be a versatile kind of leader, so that when I need you to be the one who uses the hand, you use the hand. But we already see at the very beginning that it's a much more difficult type of leadership to use your mouth, to be a persuasive leader. And of course, the other distinction is that when he uses his hand, it's against the Egyptian, taskmaster. And when he uses his mouth, it's against his own people. And he's trying to create a situation of ish vire'ehu, right? And in this, lama takeh re'echa. Yeah. And that, in order to create a respectful kind of society, one has to be a leader that uses that kind of persuasiveness. It's not simple. It's not simple for Moshe. I think it's not simple for leaders in general. It's a real lesson in leadership, I think.
I think it also connects later to when his father-in-law sees what he's doing in terms of the adjudication of the people. But he says when the Israelites fight back and they say, "Vayomer mi samcha leish zar v'shofet alenu," who made you king? I think I once saw an idea that really said, it might be here that Moshe initially developed sort of like a difficulty with self-confidence, and that later, when he feels that he has to adjudicate every case, there was sort of a feeling of scarcity, that I have to show that I am a sar v'shofet over these people, and that it takes his father-in-law to come and see him from the outside and say, this is not a good way to go about it. You should be delegating this responsibility to other people as well. But that this first interaction in almost like a judgment scenario with his brethren didn't go very well, and that it could be part of what contributed later to the fact that he sort of took too much upon himself and wasn't able to yet see that maybe this needs to be done in a different way.
I also like to connect these two incidents, the one in Perek Bet and then later on in Perek Yud with Yitro and Moshe. But I don't know if I would attribute it to lack of self-confidence, but rather a drive. What Moshe develops here is this absolute, insistence on creating a society of mishpat, on creating a society of ish vire'ehu. Mm-hmm. And what I think is quite beautiful is that at the end of this Perek Bet story, Moshe finds Reuel, who, may be identified with Yitro, or maybe Yitro's father, as someone in the Mahatanim family, right? And Moshe's meeting of Yitro is the meeting of these two like-minded figures, right? So that Yitro is the one who says to his girls, "Ve'ayo, lama ze azavten et ha'ish? How could you leave this person who you just said, ish Mitzri hitzilanu?" And what we see later in the Yitro story at the beginning of Parshat Yitro in Perek Yud is that the word that appears there over and over and over is the word lahatzil. Why does Yitro come to Har Elokim to meet Moshe after Yetziat Mitzrayim? Because he heard that God saved them. Vayatzileim Hashem, Baruch Hashem asher hitzil etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim miyad paro. The whole story there is Yitro is excited by this newfound justice that is being implemented in the world. And we already see it in this story. And then when Moshe and Yitro meet again in Shemot Perek Yud, and Yitro says to him, "What are you doing? You're going to collapse under this strain." And Moshe says something, I think, which in my mind, it's not about a lack of self-confidence, but I think it's really about him saying that I have a certain drive, which which motivates me. And he says, "Vishafatati ben ish uven re'ehu." I have to create mishpat ben ish uven re'ehu. And that's when Yitro comes in and says, "Ve'ata techezeh mikol ha'am anshe chayil," etc., etc. He says, "Go find people, v'samta alehem sarei alafim, sarei meot, sarei chamishim, v'sarei asarot, v'shafetu et ha'am." It's the same words. Mi samcha li'ish sar v'shofet, v'samta alehem sarei v'shaftu. It's the same exact words.
I wanted to just circle sort of to the last little vignette in this parak, which is where we have, as you already mentioned, Moshe sort of saving these Midianite women. And I think that if we have the first episode where we have Moshe, there's the Egyptian and there's the Israelite. In the second, we have the Ivri and the Ivri. In the third, we have women who are not at all part of Am Yisrael. That if we're speaking about Moshe Moshe's justice seeking or his sort of inner strength or desire to want to help. So here we see that it also goes beyond any delineation of kinship. These are not women that are part of his world, but that he sort of shows the same streak to want to save, which again, I think in my mind also connects him back to Levi'im, to sort of this desire to want to save and come in, whether it's something that endangers you or not. And so we have here in this situation where he comes and he helps. They think he's an Egyptian man, which is obviously fascinating in terms of Moshe and his identity at this point. But he certainly was dressed in clothing that would identify him as an Egyptian. But he comes and he saves them, and again in a way that really is very reminiscent or foreshadowing of how he's going to save Am Yisrael in the coming scenes. So he sort of practices on the women of Reuel's home as something that he will do will do later with the people themselves.
Yeah, Moshe is on an equal opportunity quest for justice, but again, I think it positions not just Moshe but also Chukei Elokim v'Torotav as a universal morality, one that is not just speaking to Am Yisrael, but one that is speaking to creating a world of justice and morality. I mean, in each of these cases, Moshe kind of steps into a situation which he's not personally involved in.
Correct.
But like you said before, right? He can't abide in justice, and he can't stand on the side and allow people to act in such an egregiously unjust fashion without stepping in.